At 5:15 in the morning, in a small town in eastern Idaho, the headlights start. They come out of driveways in Victor and Driggs, out of apartment complexes and trailer parks and houses that were cheap 15 years ago and are not cheap now. They join Highway 33, then Wyoming Highway 22, and they begin to climb. Teton Pass rises to 8,431 feet. The grade holds at 10% for 5 straight miles. In winter, the road closes for avalanche control. In summer, it fills with brake smoke. Roughly 3,400 Idaho residents drive over it every working day, and they are joined on the valley floor by thousands more coming north from Star Valley. Around 8,000 commuters in total, arriving each morning into a town of about 11,000 people. They are nurses, teachers, line cooks, sheriff's deputies, hotel housekeepers, ski patrollers. The people who open the doors of one of the wealthiest places on earth, and then, at the end of the shift, drive back over a mountain and leave the state. On the morning of June 8, 2024, they couldn't. Overnight, after weeks of heavy rain and unseasonable heat, a section of Teton Pass near milepost 13 simply left. Not a rock slide onto the highway itself. A hairpin turn slid down the mountainside and became a cliff of rubble. The 24-mile trip that took 35 minutes became an 85-mile detour that took more than 2 hours each way. For 3 weeks, the arrangement that keeps Jackson Hole running was visible in cross-section, like a cut through geology. And the obvious question is not how did a road fail? Roads fail. The question is the one underneath it. Why does the richest county in the United States, a place people spend fortunes to reach, need a mountain pass to import its own population every morning? Something happened here, not recently, and not by accident. Start with the ground itself, because the ground decided the first 100 years. Jackson Hole sits at roughly 6,200 feet. The frost-free window is short, in many years fewer than 60 days. Winter temperatures fall past 30 below. The homesteaders who filed claims here in the 1880s and 1890s were doing something close to defiance. They planted. They lost the crop. They planted again. Cattle could survive the summers, but hay had to be cut and stacked all season to keep those cattle alive through the winter, which meant a rancher spent half the year producing food for animals that produced barely enough to justify it. By 1900, fewer than 1,000 people lived in the entire valley. The homesteads that survived did so on margins so thin, they were not really businesses. They were endurance. And then a curious thing began to happen. Wealthy Easterners started asking to visit. Struthers Burt had a Princeton education and no interest in using it. He came west, worked as a ranch hand, and in 1912, he and a physician named Horace Carncross founded the Bar BC on the bank of the Snake River. It looked like a cattle ranch. It functioned as something else. Guests from Philadelphia and New York paid to sleep in the bunkhouse, ride the horses, and eat dinner beneath the Tetons. Burt understood exactly what he was selling, and he said so bluntly, the valley's cash crop was scenery. That sentence deserves a pause, because it is the hinge on which everything else in this story turns. A place that sells beef wants more pasture. A place that sells timber wants more roads. A place that sells scenery wants less of everything. Its product is degraded by its own success. Every new building, every gas station, every billboard reduces the value of the inventory. Within a decade of the Bar BC's founding, the people of Jackson Hole had arrived at a conclusion that almost no American frontier community had ever reached. They wanted the valley to stop. On July 26, 1923, a handful of residents gathered in a small log cabin on the Snake River belonging to a woman named Maud Noble. Dude ranchers, including Burt, a newspaper editor, a hunting guide, and a visitor from Yellowstone named Horace Albright, who had been trying for years to persuade Washington to protect the Teton Range. The locals told Albright something he had never heard from locals before. They didn't want the government to take the valley. They wanted someone, anyone, to buy it. Buy the ranches, buy the private land. Freeze the valley floor as a kind of living exhibit, a museum of the Old West with the elk and the cottonwoods and the mountains left intact. There was one problem. Nobody at that meeting had any money. 3 years later, Albright was driving a guest through the valley on the road past Jenny Lake, and the guest was not enjoying it. The road was accumulating the ordinary furniture of American commerce: hot dog stands, dance halls, billboards, a derelict gas station, cabins for rent. Albright pointed at the mountains. His guest kept looking at the litter in front of them. The guest was John D. Rockefeller Jr. What Rockefeller did next changed the physical composition of the county permanently, and he did it in a way that guaranteed the valley would hate him for it. He created a shell company. The Snake River Land Company, incorporated in Utah, presented itself as a cattle and recreation outfit. Its agents began buying Jackson Hole ranches one at a time, quietly, at fair market prices, from families who had been losing money on that land for 40 years. The sellers assumed they were dealing with a rancher. They were dealing with the richest man in America, buying their valley in order to give it away. By the time the truth surfaced in 1930, roughly 35,000 acres, about $1.4 million worth, had changed hands. The reaction was volcanic. Congressional hearings followed. Ranchers who had sold felt swindled, not by the price, but by the purpose. The valley had asked for someone to buy it, and then discovered that being bought feels like being taken. But notice what had actually occurred, because it is easy to miss underneath the argument. 35,000 acres of the valley floor had just left the private market. Not for a decade, not for a generation, forever. Rockefeller had the land. He couldn't give it away. Congress refused it. Wyoming's delegation blocked every attempt for more than a decade. The 1929 park had been drawn narrowly, the mountains only, not the valley, precisely to avoid this fight. Rockefeller paid taxes on land he did not want, and eventually wrote to Washington to say that if the government would not take it, he would sell it on the open market. In March 1943, Franklin Roosevelt ended the standoff by ignoring it. Using the Antiquities Act, he signed an executive order creating Jackson Hole National Monument, absorbing the Rockefeller lands and a large block of federal acreage around them. No hearings, no vote. Wyoming's response was not metaphorical. Ranchers organized an armed cattle drive across the new monument, daring federal officials to arrest them. Riding with them, in a stunt that made national newsreels, was the Hollywood actor Wallace Beery. Congress voted to abolish the monument. Roosevelt vetoed it. For 7 years, the valley existed in legal limbo. The compromise came in 1950. The monument and the old park were merged into the Grand Teton National Park that exists today. Wyoming lost the argument about the land, but it won a concession written into the enabling legislation, a provision that no new national monument could ever be created in Wyoming without the explicit approval of Congress. It was a victory about federal power. It was understood as a victory about federal power. Here is what it actually did. The boundaries drawn in 1950 were the last boundaries. The valley's inventory of private, developable land was fixed on that day and has not meaningfully changed since. Today, roughly 97% of Teton County is publicly owned. National Park, National Forest, Elk Refuge. Private property covers somewhere between 2 and 3% of the county's surface. More of Teton County is underwater than is under private ownership. This explains almost everything that follows. Every economic force that would arrive over the next 75 years, skiing, aviation, tax law, remote work, global capital, would land on the same 3% of ground. The demand curve was free to move. The supply curve had been welded to the floor by a compromise about executive overreach. Nobody in 1950 thought they were writing a housing policy. For 15 years after the park settlement, Jackson Hole remained a summer town. Businesses boarded up in October. The winter population was the population. Paul McCollister was a businessman from California who looked at the north face of Rendezvous Mountain and saw a lift line. In 1965, he opened Jackson Hole Ski Area on land leased from the Forest Service. A year later, he finished the piece that mattered, an aerial tram climbing 4,139 vertical feet in a single continuous ride. At the time, the greatest vertical rise of any lift in the United States. McAllister did not build a beginner's mountain. He built the steepest lift-served terrain in the country, including a hanging couloir called courbes that requires a mandatory air to enter. Skiers who wanted to prove something began arriving in February. The consequence was structural rather than cultural. Jackson Hole now had 2 high seasons. Hotel rooms, restaurants, retail, guides, ski patrol, lift mechanics, an entire second workforce, needed in the exact months when the first workforce had historically left, and the county's stock of housing had not grown by a single acre. There was one more piece, and it was already sitting on the valley floor, looking like a limitation. Jackson Hole Airport lies inside Grand Teton National Park, the only commercial airport in the United States located within a national park. Its existence is grandfathered, its expansion permanently constrained, its runway hemmed in by protected land. For decades, that sounded like a disadvantage. Then private aviation became the default transport of American wealth, and a small airport with a long runway, 30 minutes from a ski tram and surrounded by federally protected scenery no one could ever build on, turned into something else entirely. You could leave a city in the morning and land, by lunch, inside a national park. Access had become effortless. Land had not become more plentiful. The gap between those two facts is where the rest of this story lives. In 1982, an economist at the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City had a scheduling problem. The bank hosted an annual symposium for central bankers and academics. It was respectable and poorly attended by the one person whose presence would make it matter: Paul Volcker, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, then in the middle of the most painful monetary tightening in modern American history. The solution was not intellectual, it was recreational. Volcker was a serious fly fisherman, so the symposium was relocated to Jackson Lake Lodge, in the shadow of the Tetons, on water full of cutthroat trout, and scheduled for late August. Volcker came, so did everyone else. 4 decades later, Jackson Hole is a phrase used on trading floors in Singapore to mean a monetary policy event. This is the moment the valley entered a different bloodstream. Not tourism, finance. Every August, the people who allocate the world's capital spend a week looking at the Tetons. And while that was happening, Wyoming was quietly rewriting itself into the most accommodating jurisdiction in the country for people who already had money. No personal income tax, no corporate income tax, no tax on capital gains, no estate tax, no tax on the income of trusts. Dynasty trust legislation permitting family wealth to be held across centuries. Limited liability companies with unusually strong privacy protections. None of these laws mention Jackson Hole. All 23 Wyoming counties received them equally. 22 of those counties saw nothing happen, because the tax code alone was never the draw. Rock Springs has the same tax code. What Teton County offered was the only combination of its kind in America. A jurisdiction engineered for the preservation of capital, wrapped around scenery that had been legally frozen in 1950 so that it could never be diminished, served by an airport inside a national park. You could hold your fortune, spend your summer, and know with certainty that the view from the deck would look the same in 50 years, because building anything new was nearly impossible by law. In 2004, Teton County, Wyoming, passed New York County, New York, to become the highest per capita income county in the United States. It has not surrendered the title once in the 21 years since. Look closely at what that wealth is made of, because the composition matters more than the size. In 2024, average per capita income in Teton County reached $532,103. The second-place county in America, Summit County, Utah, home to Park City, came in at $280,510. Teton's figure was 90% higher than the runner-ups. About 77% of the county's total income came not from work, but from investments, dividends, interest, rent. That works out to over $411,000 per resident in investment income alone. No other county in the United States reaches even $180,000. Now the part that inverts the picture. Wages account for just 21% of Teton County residents' income, putting it third from last among more than 3,000 American counties, almost dead last. And yet the per capita wage in Teton County is $111,642, which is 10th in the country, on par with Silicon Valley. Read those two sentences together. Jackson Hole pays extraordinarily well, and it does not matter. Median household income in Teton County was about $124,000 in 2024, a strong American income by any measure. By the end of 2025, the median single-family home price in the county was pushing $3.3 million. In the first quarter of 2026, the Jackson Hole report contained no listings under $1 million. Not few, none. A nurse and a teacher, both employed full-time in one of the best-paying labor markets in America, cannot purchase the cheapest house in the county at any interest rate that has ever existed. So they did the only thing available. They moved over the mountain. Victor and Driggs, Idaho, agricultural towns of a few thousand people on the western slope of the Tetons, became bedroom communities for a Wyoming resort. Roughly 80% of Jackson businesses now depend on employees who commute from outside the county. The workforce pays taxes in one state and generates value in another, crossing an 8,131-foot pass twice a day to do it. Then the pressure reached Idaho too. The median home in Teton Valley has climbed to around $1 million, roughly 3 times what a median local household can afford. Employers adapted the way medieval estates did. Jackson Hole Mountain Resort went into the housing business because vacancy rates near 15% threatened its ability to operate the lifts. Grand Teton National Park houses its own rangers. The hospital houses nurses. You can live in employee housing for 20 years, retire, and still be forced to leave the valley because your home was always tied to your job. And for those who fit into none of these systems, there is the other Jackson. Campers and vans and national forest pullouts at Curtis Canyon and Shadow Mountain, and cars in town parking lots displaying municipal camping permits. People with full-time jobs brushing their teeth in a parking lot at 6 a.m. The whole arrangement rested on one 2-lane road, which brings us back to June 8, 2024. When the pass failed, the coverage focused on the engineering, the slide plane, the saturated fill, the emergency contract. Crews rebuilt a temporary detour in 20 days, an extraordinary piece of work, and traffic was moving again by June 28th. But for those 3 weeks, the thing that had been quietly assembled over a century was fully exposed. A community had solved its housing shortage by outsourcing it across a mountain range and a state line, and then made no provision whatsoever for the mountain range being unavailable. Nobody designed this. That's the point. Every individual decision in the chain was defensible, and several were admirable. Struthers Burt was right that scenery was the valley's only durable crop. The residents in Maud Noble's cabin were right that unregulated development would destroy the thing that made the place worth visiting. Rockefeller was right that the valley floor deserved protection, and he paid for it out of his own pocket. The 1950 compromise was a reasonable settlement of a genuine constitutional fight. McAllister was right that the mountain could hold a world-class ski resort. The Kansas City Fed was right that Volcker would come for the trout. Wyoming's legislature was right that friendly trust law would attract capital to a state with little else to attract it. Each choice was sound. Stacked in sequence across 100 years, they produced a county where 97% of the land cannot be built on, where the remaining 3% is the most desirable real estate in the interior West, where wages are among the highest in America and irrelevant to housing, and where the people who run the place must be trucked in daily over a pass that can and did fall off a mountain. The valley protected itself perfectly. That was the mechanism. And now the visitor numbers, which look at first like a contradiction. Grand Teton National Park recorded about 3.8 million recreation visits in 2025, one of the largest year-over-year increases in the national park system. Yellowstone, an hour north, drew 4.76 million. The town square with its arches of shed elk antlers is impassable in July. The tram has a line, the airport has a jet queue. More people are going to Jackson Hole than at any point in its history. So consider the last number. About 30% of the housing units in Teton County sit vacant, And of that vacant housing, more than 78% is classified as seasonal or occasional use. Second homes, third homes, assets. On a Tuesday evening in November, a substantial share of the most expensive residential real estate in the United States is dark. No one is home. No one was ever going to be home. The house is not a house, it is a position held in a jurisdiction with no capital gains tax, with a view that federal law has guaranteed will never change. The homesteaders came to stay and could not make a living. The dude ranchers made a living by selling the view. Selling the view required freezing the valley. Freezing the valley fixed the supply of land forever. Fixed supply plus global demand plus a tax code built for capital produced the most expensive small town in America. And the most expensive small town in America cannot house the people who operate it. So they live in Idaho and drive over the mountain, and the mountain occasionally gives way. The title of this film is not a claim about tourism. Millions come. They photograph the Antler Arch, ride the tram, drive the park loop, and leave. What ended was the other kind of going. The kind where a person arrives in a valley, finds work, buys a small house, raises children who go to the local school, grows old on the same street, and is buried in the same county. That version of going to Jackson Hole is finished. The supply of land was effectively frozen in 1950. The money arrived after 2004, and the last road out is a 10% grade over Teton Pass. Jackson Hole is more visited than ever, and less inhabited than it has been in living memory. Both of those things are true. Neither of them is a coincidence.